Okay. Oh, good good afternoon. No. Good afternoon, colleague. No. Oh, hello, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah? No.
It's coming.
Is it possible to? Is it? Can
If
they?
you can, this microphone, because we have this.
Hello, colleagues. Can I ask you? Can you? Is it? It's
I will put a little
okay.
higher, but after I will go down.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to ask you to take a seat, please. Hello. I don't have the
Where's the camera?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to ask you to take a seat. Thank you, Vice Chair, to help me to, because we have to start. I think that it's time, please. So good afternoon, and I think that all of us would like to hear today's hearing, so let's start. There are still a lot of people there at the door. So, first, we have here today adoption agenda. If I don't see any objection, so it's adopted. And the second is chair's announcement. Today's meeting is web streamed, and we have interpretation to all languages. And I would like also to thanks to all interpreters and to the technical staff to help us to organize this meeting of our committee. And at the beginning, our colleague Mrs. Hazenkap would like to do point of order. Please, the floor is yours. I don't see her.
She's there.
Yes, I'm
okay.
back.
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, I would like to make a point of order. The strategic dialogue was a very inclusive process, and all stakeholders were involved in this process. Well, all stakeholders were involved in the process of making the strategic dialogue. And as a parliament, we now have the opportunity to make it inclusive as well and have a good discussion about the outcomes. Otherwise, we will fuel the polarization that has been so characteristic for so many years on the future of agriculture and farming. So I'm therefore disappointed that this Agri-Committee did not organize this hearing and this discussion about the outcome together with the Envy Committee, where so many of the competences on our food systems lay. So I hope that we can change this in the future and we will have a perspective that is inclusive and that takes that we can work together on the just transition that is so needed for our rural areas.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask to please, could you take a seat, please, because we cannot hear each other. Please, it's hello. Who is there? At the door, there are a lot of people. Can I ask our colleagues who are at the door, please, could you take a seat? Thank you. So, dear colleagues, dear members, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, good afternoon. I am very pleased to welcome you all today at the public hearing on strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture. The matter is very important for our sector. Allow me to recall that President von der Leyen, in her State of the Union address in September 23, announced that the launching of the strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture that started in January 24. The aim was to bring together key stakeholders from the European agri-food sectors, civil society, rural communities and academia, and to develop a common understanding and vision for the future of EU's farming and food systems. This goal was achieved on the 4th of September. The strategic dialogue report titled "A Shared Prospects for Farming and Food in Europe," containing recommendations and assessment of challenges, was published. In this regard, I would like to extend my sincere congratulations for the work of those involved in the dialogue and for the timely report. I also would like to stress that the European Parliament will play its role in further discussing for the future of EU agriculture. Now, I am convinced that we need to work together and in coordinated manner to ensure that farming systems remain resilient and leave no one behind. I am also certain that this hearing will pave the way and support for future discussions and will have one on the future of EU agriculture. Dear colleagues, we have a range of expert voices here today, and I encourage each of you to bring your experiences and suggestions to the table. We also have many members of this House joining us, not only from our Agri Committee. These demonstrate that the future of agriculture is a cross-sector matter, and we need a broad dialogue to come up with adequate recommendations. According to this draft programme, we will have 2 panels in today's hearings. In the end of each exchange, we will also hear the European Commission. We will start this hearing with the statement of the keynote speaker, Professor Strohschneider. He was a special advisor to the President, and he is the chair of the strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture. But Professor Strohschneider will be today only online, and I've remarked that he will speak English and we will not have interpretation. So, Professor Strohschneider, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me at least, and the remote connection is stable. Honourable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation. It's an honour to once again be in the Committee of Agriculture, and I apologise for this being able only via the internet. I was asked to introduce the hearing on the strategic dialogue, and I'm happy to do so in my personal capacity. The strategic dialogue was launched on 25th of January this year, and a good 7 months later, on the 29th of August, the members adopted their joint report, A Shared Prospect for the Future of Farming and Food in Europe, unanimously. This report was meanwhile handed over to the President of the European Commission, who mandated the members, but these members address, of course, their recommendations also to the other European institutions, the member states, and also to themselves, and they address their recommendations not only, so to say, to the agri-food sector of policy making, but to the Commission's portfolio, all the relevant portfolios of the Commission, addressing a broad spectrum of political fields and also addressing the European Parliament and its committees in quite a range. It is not without a little pride that I can say that the members of the strategic dialogue, from COPA, COGECA to Greenpeace, from the European Investment Bank to food banks, from Rural Youth and CEJA to Food Drink Europe and Eurocommerce, that the members are now forming a forum for a fair balance of interests towards a better future. From this perspective, our endeavour has led to a twofold result. On the one hand, we have developed a conceptual consensus that opens up concrete steps for the further development of the European agri-food systems towards greater economic profitability, environmental sustainability, and social responsibility. On the other hand, the strategic dialogue has taken stock of a key area of EU life and economy through a quite atypical and new format for political discourse. Not stakeholders out of their respective silos were talking to politicians, but dialogue amongst stakeholders was at the heart of the exercise. A negotiation process between the representatives of mostly conflicting social and economic interests in the pre-political field. Prerequisite for this were confidentiality, a certain, if I may say, legitimate non-transparency, and above all, mutual trust. The latter, mutual trust, originates essentially from the ability and willingness to recognize that also counterpositions can be based on reasonable grounds, that none of the individual positions represented is completely free of contradictions, and none of them can promise a solution to all the problems on its own. I'm confident on the potential of this collaborative effort to contributing to a new, non-polarizing narrative for European agriculture. Now, the final report of the strategic dialogue hopefully can serve as a basis for this, and that is because the report describes a conceptual consensus which must be understood in its entirety and in the interdependence of its elements. The vision with which we begin the final report, the vision as a goal, sketches the horizon of new development perspectives to be pursued in the medium term, which is about 10 to 15 years. The guiding principles define the scope for action and orientation, as well as the relationships between the options for action. And the first guiding principle gives direction, time and speed together. The time for change is now, is its title. And then the recommendations themselves are proposals for concrete steps to shape the transition. Taking together these three parts, vision, principles, recommendations, these three parts form a package that does not unfold its effect by taking individual passages out of context or by nitpicking individual words. The holistic approach is therefore expected of every recipient. Those who deal with results of the strategic dialogue must face up this complexity. The report addresses agri-food systems in a holistic manner, and it addresses them as part of an urgent transformation of almost all patterns of production, distribution, consumption of goods and services. That affects a transformation that affects our entire economy and civilization. This transitional phase is now already imminent, and it must be designed in such a way that socio-economic and ecological systems are well balanced. Of course, the European Parliament and its committees will play a pivotal role in shaping this phase with its agricultural, food and environmental policies. If you allow me, I would like to outline the approach and the range of topics covered in the final report now. The aim is not to maximize single factors of production, but to optimize benefits in terms of sustainability, resilience, and greater responsibility, not only for those involved in agriculture, but also for civil society actors and political institutions. To ensure that sustainability objectives in all three dimensions, economic, environmental and social, that sustainability objectives are better reached, what is needed according to the strategic dialogue is more bottom-up processes, further harmonization, more effective enforcement and implementation of existing legislation, and closer cooperation between stakeholders. The strategic dialogue supports creating common ground on shared principles and to finding actionable leverages to improve the implementation towards a market ecological alignment. This includes measures in agriculture, processing, trade and distribution, as well as demand-driven instruments that use purchaser and consumer behaviour as a lever. An energetic development of livable rural areas contributes not least to the weakening of urban-rural dichotomies and makes it more difficult to instrumentalise them in culture wars. A rural test should be carried out to test EU legislation for its compatibility with the needs of rural areas, and the proposed rural contract should be a new beacon for rural areas. Important issues of our final report are also the asymmetric positioning of farmers in the food chain, the enhancement of sustainable farming practices, greenhouse gas emission reduction, more strategic relevance for agri-food in trade and retail, attractiveness of the sector with a focus on generational renewal and gender diversity, the complex issues of land use and land use change, or technology and innovation. The strategic dialogue is convinced that the agri-food sector is crucial to the EU's overall economic landscape. It must therefore be supported to ensure its sustainable competitiveness rather than decline. The agricultural production system of the future will clearly focus on a circular economy. External inputs such as mineral fertilizers or pesticides must be reduced to an absolute minimum and, where necessary, applied in a way that minimizes the impact on the environment and biodiversity, and so forth. The further development of the agri-food sector also continues to require financial support, particularly in the transition phase. The strategic dialogue therefore proposes to set up an agri-just transition fund and a nature restoration fund outside the CAP. The European Investment Bank, which was also a member of the strategic dialogue, has already included agriculture and bioeconomy in its strategic priorities for the coming years. Further recommendations in the financial sector aim to facilitate the acquisition of funding and public-private cooperation. If you allow me and give me the time, I would, instead of prolonging this simple list, buzzword list, so to say, of recommendations, I would like to comment on three major recommendations in the context of the final report in a little more detail. I pick three of these fields. The first is new forms of governance. The strategic dialogue proposes a benchmarking system as a future dynamic regulatory system. This should standardize the measurement of comprehensive sustainability indicators and reporting methods. It should be the basis for a market-based further development of the entire sector and initially be developed at the level of farms and farming types and then step by step extended to the entire agri-food sector. In this context, the strategic dialogue recommends a change to a more comprehensive governance, which includes, in addition to smart administrative solutions, of course, impact assessments, inclusive policy and decision-making processes, and a reduction of red tape. The last point is reflected, among other things, in the proposal to build a European board for agri-food, an advisory body that is intended to further develop the culture of communication established by the strategic dialogue, which is a recommendation that has already been taken up by President von der Leyen during the handover of the report and was expressly emphasized once again in the mission letter to the Commissioner designate. My second point here is the CAP. The direction for the CAP, as described by the strategic dialogue, is a fit-for-purpose instrument, which is also taken up already in the mission letter to Herr Hansen. The CAP must be prepared for current and future challenges, and therefore, apart from invigorating enabling conditions for rural areas, a future CAP should focus on two central objectives, namely providing socio-economic support targeted to those farmers who need it most, and that means based on farms' economic viability, an instrument that should prevent from farm abandonment and help ensure that farmers can have a decent income, an instrument that is targeted at those most in need, in particular small and mixed farms, young farmers, new entrants, and in areas with natural constraints. And the second function is promoting positive environmental, social, and animal welfare outcomes for society. Farmers should be rewarded and incentivized, not only compensated, but incentivized to establish and continue providing ecosystem services, which should go beyond what is required by EU legislation and aim at the highest ambition in a system to be linked to quantifiable results using robust indicators, for example, the benchmarking system I was talking about previously. And the financial support to environmental and climate actions will need to substantially increase annually throughout the following two CAP periods. My third and last point is demand-side oriented policies. The strategic dialogue supports demand-side oriented policies which address agri-food systems as a whole, to create enabling food environments where balanced, sustainable, healthy diets are available, accessible, affordable, and attractive, to further accelerate the transition. Public procurement, promotion policy, as well as the EU school scheme, must deliver to this by improving the current standards. Moreover, reviewing and updating food labelling and regulations for marketing to children or on price signals are further components. In the interest of producers and retailers to contribute to this, food reformulation must be a core priority. And if I have another 50 seconds or so, I would close by saying, beyond that, we observe a trend in the EU towards a reduction of consumption of certain animal-based products and an increased interest in plant-based proteins. To improve the sustainable balance between animal and plant-based protein intake, it's crucial to rebalance food environments and nutritional behavior towards plant-based options and helping consumers to embrace the transition. This trend will probably not remain without impact on animal farming, for which concrete pathways for action are needed, including, among others, financial support for practical and advanced technological solutions, and promotion of innovative circular economy approaches. Further attention is also needed, should also be given to areas of high concentration of livestock by a territorial approach, a revision of the EU animal welfare legislation, and a new regulatory framework for an EU-wide animal welfare labelling scheme. As the need for action, ladies and gentlemen, as the need for action and the costs of inaction increase, it is now up to policymakers to translate these recommendations into further planning and implementation steps. And it's up to policymakers to utilize the political capital of the conceptual consensus of the strategic dialogue.
Professor, could I ask you please to have a to go to conclusion, because
this
we are...
was already the last sentence.
Okay, so, I'm sorry. So, okay, so Professor Stoffsteiner, I would like to thank you, and we have to immediately start with panel the first panel, sustainable and competitive EU food system. And I would like to ask all our panelists to have your speech just for 5 minutes, please. So first is Peter Middendorf, President of European Council of Young Farmers. Peter, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will try to keep in the 5 minutes, otherwise I am afraid that I also will disappear. First, a small introduction. I'm Peter Middendorp. I'm a young farmer from the northern part of the Netherlands, near the German border, and I'm the president of CISIA, the European Council of Young Farmers. In September last year, CISIA welcomed the announcement of the strategic dialogue and announced in the State of the Union speech of Madame von der Leyen. And because for us it has been the start of a momentum of a real conversation about a structural approach for the agricultural sector. And after months of farmers' protests, the conversation finally started in January under Professor Strohschneider. It has been the first time that these key parties capable of initiating a solution were at the table. Representatives from the value chain, agricultural sector, and various NGOs, all present with their highest representation. It was actually already an achievement itself. The outcome should be viewed as a comprehensive report of practical pathways in agriculture, and I would like to outline a couple today. It starts with creating structure in sustainability requirements. Farmers are now burdened by different sustainability requirements stemming from supermarkets, processes, legislation and the CAP, without any coordination among these demands or any assessments whether we're actually achieving the ambitions we have. As a result, this leaves farmers in a difficult position. We need a system where sustainability can be comparable and coherent. The benchmarking system has the potential to create more clarity on the direction and comparability among sustainability. To support this conversation from society and the government, a continuous dialogue is needed. The maintenance of a democratic dialogue about the objectives of what we want to achieve as sectors and as society is essential. This is where the idea of the EBEF is coming from. It serves as a platform to structure the sustainability visions of all these actors, to give farmers clarity on where they have to move. Then secondly, I want to stress the part of farmers' income. Ensuring fairer remuneration for the farmer requires a good balance between value chain cooperation throughout, for example, the common market ordering, balanced by a robust directive against unfair trading practices. This should encourage and safeguard sustainability agreements while providing farmers tools to combat wrongdoings within the supply chain. And then lastly, I would like to ask some focus for the recommendations on young farmers, on the next generation. Specifically looking at the action plan for generational renewal, something Cesia has been asked for years. And we were very happy to see it back in the mission statement of Hansen. And we would like you to ask for your support on this as well. Second, the land aspects are for us quite important, creating the opportunity to get more access to land for my members. And thirdly, the access to finance, highlighted by the investment package of the European Investment Bank of 3 billion euros. The next step includes engaging a dialogue with other institutions, particularly the most important European Parliament, alongside the step-by-step approach to policy making. It is essential to establish clear directions collaboratively with relevant sectors. I encourage you to appreciate this report for what it is, a consensual foundation to build upon the next mandate. Too many young farmers are leaving the industry each day with little chance of returning. Yet these are the farmers that we need to ensure food security. They are essential for increasing the resilience of the agricultural sector and developing climate-proof food production. We owe it to them not to turn this report into a political battleground, but rather seize it as an opportunity for a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And now I would like to ask Lily Balogh, President of Agroecology Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm also a farmer myself in northern Hungary, and I'm as well the president of the Hungarian Agroecology Network Association. And my organization, Agroecology Europe, that I represent, was founded in 2016 to put high on the European political agenda agroecology and to connect the different members and researchers promoting agroecology in Europe and beyond. And I guess then we can already skip to the second slide, the third slide then, because it's going quite slow. Indeed, I will go very quickly through this just to put you on a common ground, like why business as usual is not acceptable anymore. As you might know, we have reached a safe space of operation. We have transpassed the planetary boundaries on so many levels. Climate change is here, it's happening. Droughts are every day, floods are every day. Soil erosion is a peaking point. Next slide, please. But as well, if we're looking at our current dominant food system, it's creating a huge bill for the health system as well, because it's providing unhealthy diets to most of the people. Not only it increases hunger in the world, but it's as well creating many different, increasing the diseases, dietary related diseases like obesity and diabetes among children and adolescents as well. Next slide, please. And as well, like if we're talking about the decrease of biodiversity, and I guess you are familiar with the IPBES report, which was published a couple of years ago, it's not only a problem of the biodiversity in general, but as well in agrobiodiversity. We are creating unresilient food systems, and therefore we are putting at stake our whole existence. Next slide, please. But there's as well a decrease in diversity as well in the input sector, and farmers are constantly in a lock-in system. It's not normal that only two companies are controlling more than 40% of the seed market worldwide. And I could go on, but you will receive my slides and you can see the concentration that goes on and why farmers are at stake. Please, next slide. And then, of course, as it was mentioned by Peter, access to land is a huge issue. There's a huge land concentration going on in the EU and worldwide as well. But access to land to new generational farmers and young entrants is almost impossible. Next slide, please. And I could go on as well about the multitude of different problems, just like that there's at least a maximum 10-15% of farmers below 40 years old, the rural depopulation is going on, etc., inequalities. But I am here to talk as well positively. So next slide, please. And the urgent need of, oh, yes, sorry, not yet. Yes, because there's one more important thing, that there's a huge disparity in agriculture incomes as well, and that 30% of European farmers do not receive at all CAP subsidies. However, they are producing food every day for the European society. And now let's go into the solution part. Yes, so it's times of polycrisis where there's an urgent need for collective action, where respectful and balanced dialogue is a must. And hence, agroecology, which is a globally, internationally recognized framework based on the 10 elements of FAO and the 13 principles of the high level of panel of experts, which was adopted by all EU member states and beyond, proposes a transformation of the whole food system, starting from an agroecosystem level and increasingly developing to the whole food system. So there are solutions, and it's not one size fits it all, but it's territorial based approaches which are there, and worldwide we can see thriving, wonderful solutions. Next slide, please. So some of them, just to give you a few examples because I'm running out of time. So working with nature can enhance biodiversity and enhances biodiversity, not only can, but does. And ecosystem services such as agroforestry, integrated pest management, crop rotations where leguminouses are incorporated. And I can go on and on and on about the different technical aspects, but I think now we won't have time for that. But it is possible, and it has been done for ages throughout Europe and beyond. Next slide, please. And as well on the consumer side, we see very amazing initiatives all around Europe as well, where farmers are receiving fair incomes while the consumers have access to healthy and nutritious food for a fair price. So it's a win-win situation for all. We should promote these approaches. Next one, please. Where they are taking into account, of course, marginalized communities. As well, agroecology is promoting as well horizontal decision and participatory inclusive decision-making processes, hence, just the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact and many others. Please, next slide. And on the economic viability of agroecology, there are many, many proofs that agroecology is viable, economically viable, and it does outperform the conventional agricultural food systems models. So you can find many different scientific reviews on this. Next slide, please. And 78% of the studies show that agroecology is positively correlated and does secure food security and nutrition. Bless you. Next slide, please. So we should consider that food is a human right, and the EU has signed up to many international different declarations and acts, and so is as well committed to promote agroecology. Therefore, we need action, and that, as Professor Strohsander was saying, the time for action is now. Next slide, please. So for the SD recommendations, and this is my last slide, promise, what we are requesting is that agroecology is put forward and that investment and support for independent agroecology advisory services are there for the farmers in order to help them to transition to greener and to agroecology. And increase the incentivize the direct support to farmers who are already adopting sustainable practices and are willing to move towards these. And we should be aware that agroecology not only increases the resilience of farms, biodiversity, climate change-wise, but as well income-wise. Hence, it might be a little bit more expensive to invest in them now, but on the longer run, it's a much more resilient system financially as well for the EU to create food security. And of course, as I was saying, it is embodied in UN discourse and activities, therefore we should continue the line. Thank you very much. I think this was my last slide, and I'm over the time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And next 5 minutes, please, 5 minutes, I would like to ask Leo Alders, President, Fertilizers Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the European Parliament. I would like to begin by expressing our gratitude to President von der Leyen for her visionary leadership in initiating the strategic dialogue on the future of Europe's agriculture. Europe indeed needs a sustainable and competitive agriculture, and achieving this depends on the cooperation of all stakeholders. The fertilizer industry stands ready to play its part. To this end, we seek support in 3 critical areas to succeed. The first success enabler is the investment in green fertilizers. The greening of fertilizers comes with a price tag. We need funding for our industry's commitment to develop environmentally friendly fertilizers. The mineral fertilizer sector is embarking on an ambitious journey towards decarbonization. While we are fully committed to this transition, we must acknowledge that it represents an industrial revolution, one that poses profound financial, technical and logistical challenges. This is not a task any sector can undertake alone. We look to the European Union for continued support in realising this vision. To illustrate our commitment and the challenges we face, let me highlight two important decarbonisation routes in our industry. The first is the investment in green ammonia technologies by using green power from wind, solar and hydro to produce ammonia without fossil fuels, significantly reducing carbon emissions. The second route is carbon capture and storage. We are implementing CCS technologies to capture CO2 emissions and store them safely, thereby minimizing our carbon footprint. Let me now address the second success enabler, the development of a market for green fertilizers. We seek support to develop a market for green fertilizers and, by extension, for green food in Europe. Mineral fertilizers are indispensable for food production in Europe, accounting for approximately 50% of total food production. They are the backbone of agricultural productivity, and without reliable access to these resources, EU's food security is at risk. We further promote tools and technologies that enhance food security while ensuring environmental sustainability. We focus on innovations in precision farming and the development of new products to help farmers achieve high yields while minimizing nutrient losses. There is, however, an important threat on the horizon. European fertilizers are losing market share as they are increasingly replaced by cheaper and non-sustainable Russian alternatives. The invasion of Ukraine has heightened Europe's dependence on fertilizer imports, leading to plant closures and exposing farmers to increased market volatility. As a result, cost often takes precedence over decarbonization goals when farmers choose fertilizers. And finally, the third success enabler is the support for farmers to adopt sustainable practices. Farmers are under immense pressure and require support and incentives to implement sustainable farming methods. Ensuring the optimal use of fertilizers is crucial for sustainable agriculture. To embark on the decarbonization journey, farmers need training and education, financial incentives, partnerships with local businesses, recognition programs and regulatory support. Key elements that emerged from our dialogue discussion, which you are all well aware of. In conclusion, the fertilizer sector is committed to a constructive dialogue. We believe that the strategic dialogue outcome offers an invaluable opportunity to enhance collaboration amongst all stakeholders in the agricultural sector. Together we can transform these aspirations into reality and drive meaningful change in our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Nelly Hajdu, Secretary General from European License Committee from Agriculture and Agri-Food Trade, please.
Thank you very much. SELCA is the European Liaison Committee for Agri-Food Trade, so we represent all kinds of commodities and their trade in Europe and in the world. And let me start with some general remarks. This is, and here I have to echo the professor, a holistic report. This is not a cherry-picking report. It's a very fine and sensitively negotiated report, and all the topics are not just under the keyword search. So CAP is reflected in all kinds of chapters. So is trade. So in this way, it needs to be read, and this is really important. It is also important to read, having in mind what is not in the report. It could have been worse or better. Depends on how you see it. And in that regard, we welcome the importance given to the outcome of this report, also in the respective mission letters. Naturally, I will be able to speak about all kinds of chapters, but I will focus on the promoting global transition chapter. And I would like to remind you on 3 elements which are maybe not that popular. Agri-food production and trade does not operate in a silo. There is no isolated European food system, and we are embedded, and our operations are embedded in a complex, fragmented, and highly globalized environment. Secondly, also not so popular, but we're going into a structural, geographic and systematic change in agricultural production, which is irreversible. This is caused by climate change and geopolitical challenges, but it will us embed even more in an international context, and we will need each other more than ever. And thirdly, before diving into the chapter itself, sustainable agri-food trade and sustainable supply chains cannot be reviewed in a simplistic manner. That means short supply chains, low emissions, is not the conclusion we can do as of today, because it's simply not true. We really have to look at the complexity of supply chains, including biodiversity, water, and emissions in that regard. So in that context, understanding the outcome of the chapter, you will have to look a bit on how we went on the topic. And I see probably a couple of people asking, like, where's actually the famous mirror clause in the chapter? So we have to really look at this systematically, and that's what we've done in the strategic dialogue. So we did, at the very beginning, a systematic mapping. We started with mirror clause, we ended with alignment of trade and sustainability policy. Why? Because we basically asked ourselves, why do we want mirror clause? Who wants them? How should they be applied? What are the pros and cons? And without going too much into the detail, it was very much clear what we understand, which is a one-on-one application of EU law to third country partners, is not reflecting the unique geographic and local conditions of agriculture within Europe, but also not with our trading partners. So much more than having a mirroring of measures, people, organizations of different perspectives wanted comparability. So further, we have a benchmarking system under discussion. Again, if we're looking at this and we want outcome-based approaches, we also need to be coherent with our trading partners on that. So having said this, complex challenges need complex answers. For us and for the recommendations of the dialogue, they lay in three basic pillars. The first one, and it's a red thread through the entire report, is transparency, comparability, knowledge building, better impact assessment. Yeah, we can bound this to the benchmarking system. This is an opportunity here, but we can also make this make all the tools available we have in our toolbox in that regard. We also need more detailed impact assessment ahead of trade negotiations. A second, and probably one of the more important one, is we need an institutional change. We cannot look at exports in a different way than we look at imports. What we have right now is DG Trade negotiating our export offensives, and then a set of institutions looking at imports. This is creating the incoherence we're experiencing right now, and which we urgently need to solve. Only if we look at trade in a holistic manner, we will be able to really grasp the sensitive issues case by case. And it is also obviously important to include trade into the conceptual stages of policy making. So as we saw with deforestation, and what we can see already with other initiatives going on right now, the consideration of trade in sustainability requirements has to be starting from day one. And thirdly, and this is probably the most important one, the European Union should take leadership in working towards a global trade policy framework for sustainable agri-food systems. That means using the WTO toolbox, international standard setting, looking at already existing reciprocity and equivalence, but also beyond. And as a kind reminder, it always needs to be operational in all parts of the supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the last will be Massimiliano Giansante from COPA.
Grazie, signora Presidente. Gentili onorevoli.
Thank you very much, President. And Massimiliano Giansanti, I'm an Italian farmer, and I am the president of Agricultura, and I also preside over COPA right now, which involves 70 member states and millions of farmers in the member states. First of all, this is my first official appearance now before you, and it's an honor indeed, and before members. Now, I produce cereals, kiwis, Parmigiano Reggiano, and a number of other dairy products as well. Of course, we use different innovative forms of, and we try to produce using renewable energies, sustainable overall. We want to guarantee a sustainable, competitive future. This is a challenge for growth as well for all people in the sector that work with us. Now, as far as the European dimension, working with all European associations and farmers throughout Europe is absolutely key. Agriculture today in Europe is going through a number of different serious problems, particularly following COVID. And of course, the consequences of the war in the Middle East, the war in the Ukraine. We have instability in markets. We also have the impact of climate change. And all of this has created numerous problems in all member states of the European Union, from north to south, east to west. Over the last years, we have seen the high temperatures, heavy rains, and other such extreme weather phenomena, which have caused serious problems in agriculture throughout the continent. The value chain as well has undergone numerous changes as well. So geopolitics plays a very important role. We need international dynamic, if you like, a way to be able to produce food. Food has to be dealt with almost as a weapon. In other words, we have to serve our consumers. And we've been looking at the very challenges that exist and the policies that have been adopted by this Parliament and by the Commission as well. It's important to understand that agriculture is strategic for Europe. And we of course, also want to make sure that farmers reap the necessary profits in order to be able to survive. Reciprocity with third countries. This is another issue of great importance as well. Also the generational change, which has been mentioned. Young farmers, ever so important. Research and innovation to deal with the climate challenges and demographic issues as well. We all want to be part of the strategy to meet the various challenges that exist. I think today, more than ever, the issue of the environment, climate change, these are issues that concern us tremendously to be able to create a secure food market. And I think that we have to work together with the Commission in order to meet the various targets that have been set. We need targets, of course, that can be achieved as well. It creates a number of different difficulties when we establish targets that really, in reality, cannot be achieved. So, also, it's very important for agricultural undertakings to be robust, to be strong. Rural development, extremely important as well, supporting our farmers in general. As far as the strategic dialogue, we have to understand that this is a starting point. We haven't reached the end. We set targets to achieve, but we're at the beginning now of this particular strategic dialogue right now. Food safety and food security are, of course, the key issues. We also have to make sure that the competitiveness of our farmers is maintained, because we're speaking about global agro markets where they have to compete. The challenge of the future is what we're talking about. I think we have to speak about incentives. We have to really emphasize this. And indeed, our speaker today spoke about the necessity for establishing incentives for farmers to be able to move forward effectively on the global market as quickly as possible. Transforming agriculture, and we have to understand, we farmers, we are not the problem. We are part of the solution of the problem that exists. We guarantee food security and safety in Europe, And we have to make sure that we have a CAP which is robust, resilient, taking into consideration the major international agreements, such as the Mercosur agreements and other similar such agreements. And we have to see, indeed, where we can make sure that the value chain is maintained as such and made all the more robust under these particular global circumstances. We are at the side of consumers in the European Union, and we want to work together with you for a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask questions by coordinator and other committee members, each for 1.5 minutes. But first, I would like to invite to welcome here Chair of Envy Committee, my colleague Antonio De Caro. So, Antonio, the floor is yours.
Grazie Presidente per aver organizzato.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having organized this ever so important dialogue. I, like John Santi, come from a family of farmers where agriculture, work on the land, that this is the key, of course, to having the necessary food security and safety that we strive for. And CAP funds ought to go in that direction. In other words, they have to be used in order to promote and to sustain agricultural practices of a sustainable nature, taking into consideration the environmental aspects, making sure that sustainability is the key issue above all. Now, agricultural transition is something that, of course, will involve sacrifices for all. These are challenges that have to be confronted. And we have to work together in a concerted fashion. In other words, it's a journey where we share the targets and the values in order to achieve those particular targets. And that's why the challenges for farmers. Of course, there are the local idiosyncrasies, but overall we have the issues of employment, competitiveness, and, of course, we have to always keep our eye on that link between agriculture, health, and food security and safety as well. Synergy between the numerous different remits here in the Parliament is extremely important. In other words, we have to understand that the various committees will have to work together once again in a concerted fashion in order to reach the desired goals. Thank you.
It will be better in future. So, and now I would like to ask Herbert Dorfmann, Agri EPP.
Ja, danke, Frau Vorsitzende. Ja,
Thank you very much. Before questions, I simply wanted to touch upon some of the issues that were touched upon by Mr. Strohschneider. Now, the Secretariat was asked whether his presence would be fine, and they said yes, but it appears that's not the case. Things went off after 10 minutes, and I simply wanted to ask if there was indeed a proper arrangement made with Mr. Schneider with regard to the particular time. And also, I ask whether perhaps it was intentional that he's been kept far away from us in this particular fashion of presentation. And Mr. Strohschneider, now it's quite unusual that in this afternoon that we can't have his presence here today, and maybe the question surrounds what he was provided, what was given to him in order to be able to be present here this afternoon. So a question, Mr. Strohschneider. So first of all, I would like to thank our Italian guest here as well. Now the question of the remuneration of farmers, we have to see indeed, are we speaking of issues where there's not sufficient remuneration? And is the money going in the proper direction as well? So indeed, those are issues that I would like to ask, as well as something else, taking into consideration, for example, that the CAP can't become more complicated. It is already complex enough. And Peter Soller, what was said by young farmers, I do have I take this very much to heart. What can be done? What can be done for young farmers? Indeed, this is the most important aspect of the entire issue as they constitute the future.
Sí, EPP-NV.
Sí, muchísimas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy that the primary sector is taken into account because it deserves this, and it has to be factored in from the beginning of policy-making processes. Now, in terms of the fact that it has been taken into account, I think we have to talk about money. We can't create a future CAP turning our back on the primary sector. We can't do it with our back turned to farmers. So, to date, what we've seen and what we've seen in the last term is that what has been taken into account is the green architecture of the CAP as an idea and as the guide to design the common agricultural policy, and that cannot be the way to move forward. We have to take into account profitability of European farms to design the future of the CAP. As regards money, we can't have more European policy with less money. So the contributions of member states, and I'm happy to repeat this over and over again, it must go up by 1% of GDP, because otherwise we will not be able to support the CAP which is needed. Furthermore, in terms of the ideas that we've heard in the media, in terms of putting an end to the support measures as we know them, and this idea of next generation and changing where the funds go, is not appropriate. Now, Spain, where decentralisation means that regions and local authorities play a key role, a Spanish farmer must receive the funds that they deserve. And this can't cease just because another region doesn't comply with the appropriate policies. Thank you.
I would like just to repeat that we have you just 1.5 minutes, please. Now I would like to ask Dario Nardella, SND Agri.
Grazie Presidente, ringrazio gli interlocutori. Anche io ho difficoltà a
I too have difficulties as far as when we're speaking about a strategic dialogue, we're speaking about a dialogue with the individual that has written it, our guest, and, well, is it possible? Now, dialogue is absolutely imperative. Otherwise, we have polarization, and that's counterproductive. We have to deliver a key message. Agriculture, farmers are not the enemies of the environment, and the particular arguments that have been used in the past do not apply. It is farmers that will protect biodiversity. They will provide for that food security. They will fight climate change, although they are victims of it as well. So we agree that environmental agriculture, once again, it's not a problem. It's an opportunity to deal with climate change. And now what we have to do is look for those resources for agriculture. We have to use those resources effectively. We need innovation, and we have to provide those who deserve to be provided with, in other words, those who work for environmental farming. And now, we have 200 small agricultural undertakings, or we have hundreds of small undertakings in the sector, in agriculture. And of course, they play a very important role as well. Innovation is key. And that's why I would like to ask our panelists, what do they think about the issue of attracting young people, providing those necessary resources in rural areas? And what do they think about the idea in the report of the Council on agroalimentary issues? Thank you.
I have here on the list Christopher Clergeau, SND NV, but I don't see. Yeah, okay. You're no. You are not Clergeau. Clergeau, or who is it? No, sorry. Okay, you are taking the floor instead, colleague Clergeau. Okay, please, the floor is. But I don't see your name.
Tobak.
Thank you.
Madam President, thank you very much.
Indeed,
replacing my colleague Christophe Clergeau. I would like to thank all the panelists for their explanations, and mostly Professor Strohsnyder for a very balanced and forward-looking report that, as far as I see, points to a fact that the common CAP is actually not exactly fit for purpose when we look at the challenges we are faced with. We have a CAP that has for decades supported fewer and fewer farmers, actually, to produce simply more. What we need, if we look at the challenges we are faced with, both in food security and in climate change and in environmental damage, is a CAP that will start to support more farmers, preferably younger farmers, to produce better. And that is a challenge that we need, that needs a big review and a big fundamental rethinking of a number of the support mechanisms that do indeed not incentivize things like ecosystem services, but that also right now do not enable farmers that want to adapt to a more sustainable business model. Because way too often, farmers, especially younger, smaller scale, sustainable farmers, do not have a viable business model because they actually are somebody else's business model. A business model where people live out of them taking all the risks and them taking all the damage when something goes wrong. We need to change that, and the CAP needs to be a driver in changing that, to indeed be more sustainable, to make a viable, certain, predictable, decent living out of sustainable farming, which today is not the case. And for that, indeed, the interests of farmers, of new, younger farmers, need to be central, because it is indeed they that will not only provide food security, but will also provide those ecosystem services that will avoid that our rural areas are just food production floors for food. Our rural areas need to be a lot more than that if you want people to have a future, and they need to be supported in becoming a lot more than that. Thank you.
Thank you. Boras Pabon Mireira, PFE Agri. Okay. Thank you.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the speakers and the professor. And of course, it is a bit strange that he's not here. I think he should be here so that we can have a proper dialogue with him. I will go straight to the point because we don't have much time. In this committee, the over and over again is sustainability. Now, surprisingly, and I'll start with the main point here, a green CAP cannot exist if the money is not there. How can farms be sustainable if they're not profitable? It is impossible. The latest reforms of the CAP have tried to support profitability of farms, okay, but at the same time they have increased the environmental requirements, which are always counterproductive. A clear example of this is diversification of crops, which has led to many pieces of land being abandoned. And there's also an impact of this green ideology which is impregnating these CAPs. Now, we've heard the Farm to the Fork, the biodiversity strategy and others, and these are filling up the sector with unnecessary red tape and creating costs which are suffocating our farmers. Instead of increasing bureaucracy, we must focus our efforts on innovation, but real innovation, precise farming, biotechnology, drones, post-harvest technologies, and of course facilitating access to these tools so that our farms can be competitive and sustainable. Now, the strategic dialogue that we've seen today, well, it's just words on paper, and we'll see what happens in the end. Because will the comments and questions actually be taken into account that we're hearing today? Now, I'm going to ask a question very quickly. Firstly, do you think that Europe should not look to its competitors to ensure that it is competitive. And with regards to the generational renewal, profitability is key for young people, of course, but what other specific initiatives do you think have been most successful so that this generational renewal actually takes place? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Valérie Deloche, PFINV.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Chair, panellists, colleagues, thank you. I think it's scandalous that the Professor is not here with us today and that there was no interpretation. Now, my comment focuses on one point. Now, you highlighted the importance of ensuring fair income for farmers. At the same time, today we're talking about a programme which favours vegetable or plant-based proteins rather than animal proteins, and this pushes aside a key sector. Now, in the strategic dialogue, I don't believe that consumers are moving away from meat because of an ideology. I think it's more to do with price. Good quality meat is becoming too expensive for Europeans who are suffering crisis after crisis. For livestock farmers, there must be a just transition fund created. How much? How will this be funded? How will we make it accessible? And how will we put this in place? Now, for example, moving farmers to different sectors, etc. Do you really expect to be able to balance these two opposed ideologies, supporting farmers and getting rid of the sector at the same time? Thank you.
Thank you. And Carlo Fidanza, ECR, agree?
Grazie Presidente, non mi unirò al coro che pure...
Thank you very much. Of course, I do share that criticism as concerns this particular discussion with Professor Schneider. So we have these open questions which are here. We express them, but he's not here. Now, the first issue was brought up by colleague Aidu and by John Santi as well, the issue of reciprocity with exporting countries. Now, in the final document of the strategic dialogue, attention is paid to this particular issue, but we don't have any commercial agreements in place right now. So we're speaking about a very important issue, the export of European goods and the import of goods from third countries. The issue of standards is very important here. We have particular challenges on this particular front, particularly as concerns the Chinese. So we have to put this at the core of our evaluation. And also, brought up by colleague Francesco Penna, I think indeed there has been a kind of divergence in the section which discusses animal protein and plant protein, the sustainability of one compared to the other. And I don't know if the particular approach that's been adopted in the text, I don't know if it's something that's fair to present in the discussion where consumers are involved as well. So a couple of days ago, it was requested from a member state to change the terms that were used for particular products that are non-meat products, for example, as concerns hamburgers and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of general question for President John Santi, whom I would like to congratulate for recent election. And I do think it's very important to participate together in person, of course, as well, in this particular strategic dialogue, looking at the various issues of the CAP and the budget and resources that will be earmarked in that direction. Thank you.
And colleague Beatrice Timgren, NVECR. Okay.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear representatives from the agriculture sector, I'm pleased to see you here today. Individuals who are actually affected by what we decide here in Brussels and European Parliament. You should know that you are needed. After listening to you today, I feel even greater as a responsibility to act. The first question, how can we increase Europeans' self-sufficiency and reduce our dependence on food imports? Swedish farmers and many of their European colleagues struggle for their survival every day. They need our support. How can we politicians help stop the flight from farming profession and ensure that future citizens also want to become agriculture entrepreneurs? Another question is how the ban on combustion engines affect our farmers. Many farmers rely on machines powered by these engines to manage the farms, and it's time to stop complicating things for those who actually toil out in the fields. We must combat the utopians and start listening to who are truly affected. Let's create an agricultural policy that supports our farmers instead of stifling with bureaucracy and regulations. My question is, which single EU directives has been most harmful to you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. From Budget Committee, I would like to ask Siegfried Muresan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Look, firstly, let my colleague Carla Tavares and myself, as the two co-rapporteurs on the multi-annual financial framework, thank you for the invitation to come here today and to tell you that Carla and myself were just appointed as MFF co-rapporteurs some weeks ago. We are now starting work here in the Parliament, and we will be looking forward to working closely with the Agri Committee in this process, because we believe that the funding to farmers, to agriculture is key, is essential. It should remain one of the priorities for the budget of the European Union. The negotiations on the next MFF will be difficult, because we will have to accommodate the traditional priorities of the Union, agriculture and cohesion, but also the new priorities, digitization, security, defence, transition to a green economy. But our clear intention is to continue to make the case, to advocate for robust funding for agriculture, so that we can continue to preserve the quantity and the quality of the food produced here in Europe. We are here today primarily to introduce ourselves, to listen to the conclusions and to the debate that we have, and of course we are taking the strategic dialogue into very strong account for our work. We're also looking at the conclusions of the report, and we are seeing the case being made for more support to small farmers, young farmers, new farmers, eventually a shift away from farm size. And our question, of course, to the experts is, how would you see this working in practice? Would you advocate for the same budget for agriculture? Do you foresee any increases? That's my first question. And my second question is, how do the experts see and how do they assess the agriculture sector in Ukraine? And how can they foresee a gradual integration into the European market, not at the expense of farmers from EU member states? We need to defend both. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Carla Tavares, Budget Committee.
Thank you so much. Tal como o meu colega.
Now, as my colleague Siegfried just said, we are the co-rapporteurs for the MFF. Therefore, it's extremely important for us to be here, and we are here to listen. We know that it is crucial that this strategic dialogue take place, because agriculture must be modernised and it must be as efficient as possible. Now, we have a number of questions, but I'm going to focus on two that we think are important. Now, this relates to supporting the transition to a more sustainable agriculture and the recommendation of a just transition fund for this transition. Now, this is probably inspired in the just transition for fund for those regions who have been impacted by climate change. Now, the support for this proposal is important. Now, this fund would be outside of the CAP, and the Commission would have to simplify its approach. This objective could also be achieved. Now, in terms of the incentive of environmentally friendly practices in agriculture, what margin would there be to include price fixing in terms of carbon principles in the farming sector? Is that one way to go? And it is, of course, a shame not to have the professor here to answer some of our questions, because, of course, the CAP is extremely important for the future of all of the member states in the European Union. Thank you.
And Elsi Katainen, Renew Agri.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for the presentation. Although also I think that dialogue should be genuine and lively. Ongoing development and evaluation of agriculture sector and food chain is as a whole is essential. The central factor at the farm level to secure the future is general profitability. Only economic viable farms can put effort on sustainable farm level development. And this means that us decision makers need to make actions like strengthening the farmer's position in the whole food chain, better understanding of the world's market situation and evaluation of the markets in a long run, but also planning on EU trade policy. I'd like to ask panelists, how do you see the development of risk management tools, but also recognition of market disturbances on a long run, so we can estimate better possible market disturbances? And on CAP, how do you see the possible funding instruments from where we can have the money on these actions? We really do need to improve EU's competitiveness in trade policy, because after all, EU is a key player in the global food markets.
Thank you very much. And just, colleague, I have to close the list for this panel. And I would like to give the floor Pascal Canfin, Renew NV. Canfin.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Chair. My question, or rather my comment, is for all of the panelists. So it is for all of the panelists as a member of the Committee for the Dialogue for the Future of Agriculture in the EU. I'd like to say thank you, because you have managed to work together and to depolarize this issue. Some of us here try to constantly polarize this issue, so thank you for that work. It took a number of months, but you managed to reach a consensus on the outcome. Now, all of the members here and the members of your committee don't agree with all of the conclusions, but what's important here is the compromise that you have reached. And someone said this is a holistic approach. So I would invite you to stand firm on this holistic approach and the compromise, because it's the package that you have produced which allows us to focus on solutions and to overcome the tensions that we've had in the past. Yes, we have to deal with adaptation to climate change, which is driving down yield. Yes, we have to change regulations. Yes, we have to bolster the CAP budget. But it is the addition of all of these solutions which will allow us to find the way forward. So thank you, and please stand firm and avoid any more polarisation of this debate. Thank you.
Thomas Weitz from Greens Agri.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, many of you may know I'm a South Alpine farmer in Austria, medium size, in Europe, small. And I just want to make clear that COPA is not representing me here. They are not representing all farmers. The Austrian member organization is an integral part of the Conservative Party. So if I would sign up for this organization, I would automatically be a member of Conservative Party. That's why I decided to give my speaking time to an organization that is much closer to my heart, which is Via Campesina, that is unfortunately not invited. So their statement: every day more than 800 small and medium farmers are forced to give up in Europe. The Strategic Dialogue report recognizes the need to pay special attention to the needs of small and medium-sized peasants and farmers and artisanal producers. This is also required by 2018 UN declarations of the rights of peasants. As the only organization representing small and medium-sized peasant farmers at the European level and in the dialogue, we were therefore particularly surprised and disappointed not to be invited today to this public hearing. For European Via Campesina, the outcome of the strategic dialogue include positive opportunities for real agroecological transition in Europe's agriculture. We underline the importance of prices paid to farmers that cover production costs. A CAP for those who need it most is and the creation of agricultural land observatory and a plan for generational renewal. As our European farmers are fighting to survive, ComAgri and other EU institutions must send a clear message to both farmers and other stakeholders within the strategic dialogue results that shall translate into action and not just empty words. And just two questions for our panelists. Mr. Alders, are you investing your windfall profits that you did in the aftermath of the price peaks that were heavy for us farmers into green fertilizers? And where are you with these investments? And to Ms. Haidu, can you please explain how regional value chains are not good for farmers, consumers, environment, and climate? Thank you.
Okay. Super. Jutta Paulus from Greens, NW.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ich werde Deutsch sprechen.
I shall speak German. I read the report with interest, and in the summary, the triple crisis of pollution, climate change, and loss of biodiversity is recognised in the cross-border nature. Thank you very much to Lily. The graphs were really helpful and useful in this context, and I would commend it to all members of the committee to take a look at it. It chimes in with what, for example, the European Environment Agency has given us by way of data. It's also spelt out that maximisation of yield, that has been obviously the main aim of the CAP hitherto, must be dropped, and we should make our agriculture more resistant and able to cope with the future. What we're doing with our earth and environment is pushing it to its limits, and it's not healthy. In terms of the strategic dialogue, and what I'm missing are specific recommendations to promote biodiversity, reduce the external input of mineral fertilizers and so on. And in Part C, it talks about the CAP having to promote biodiversity. Supposedly it's done that for decades, and even more, listening to some panelists, but unfortunately this is not feeding through into maintenance of biodiversity, rather the opposite. And yes, the Commission should release its announced nutrition management plan, which was supposed to happen in 2023. What's going to be in it and how's it going to work? And yes, the member states should recommend more sustainable practices. I'm not sure why they need more support for that, but what specific measures should be applied to reduce the use of pesticides and fertilizers and allow a good yield for farmers? I haven't found those. Thank you.
And I would like to ask Eliu Winkler from INTA.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm replacing, and thank you for the invitation for Chair Bernd Lange of the International Trade Committee. We have in the same very time our committee meeting, so he's chairing there, but I'm one of the vice chairs and I'm replacing him. I think that it's very much need of more communication between international trades people and agri people, because I think that we have very important topics in common. About this hearing today, let me just make 3 points very briefly. maybe 4 points very briefly. First one is that agri-food products and trade in agri-food products are absolutely important for the European Union agriculture, but also for the EU trade balance, because we have a very clear trade surplus. In 2023, for example, we had 70 billion euros of trade surplus in the field of agri-food. So this is absolutely important. My second point, it's much dialogue about the impact of trade agreements of the European Union on the European agriculture, and we have clear data, and the European Commission can present them, about the fact that the agri-food sector benefits from trade liberalisation not only on processed products, but also on basic commodities, dairy, pig meat, wine and others. So when there is a necessity, then of course we can use trade defence tools, for example, as we did in emergency breaks in the case of Ukraine situation this year earlier, or tariff trade quotas, of course, which you all know very well. My third point would be that if we really want a strategic autonomy of the European Union, then trading with a wide array of partners, also in agri-food, that would be very, very important. So we are open for continuing our debate, discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. And Luke Flanagan, the Left Agri.
Professor Strohschneider appears to be quite a good communicator, but he'd really want to look up the difference between the word dialogue and monologue. He came into the plenary debate and he spoke and he ran away, we say it in my country, with his tail between his legs. He didn't stay to listen to people. And this is meant to be a dialogue. It's meant to build consensus. It's meant to give people confidence. Professor Strohschneider, well done. You have damaged the confidence. Even though we paid you a crazy amount of money, people talk about there's no money in farming. That's a lie. There's no money for farmers. There's money for the fertiliser people. There's money for people like me who work in here on the Agri Committee. There's money for Professor Strohschneider. There's money for people who sell the machinery. And we have the ploughing championship every year in Ireland. And we see all these people with loads of money. And we see the small-scale farmers walking around with holes in their trousers because we have all of their money. When I hear people talk about we need to help small-scale farmers, and I hear various different ministers from various different governments talk about it, well, you're lying. Because if you really did care about small-scale farmers, you would have used the CRIS mechanism in this CAP to give more to small farmers. Ye didn't. 6 countries gave more than the minimum of 10%. So what's going to change in the future if national governments really don't care about small farmers? What I like about the CAP is that it has been there for a long, long time and it is constant. When I hear about a nature restoration fund, I say good, but will it be permanent? Will it be like the Natura 2000 payments that came in 1991, started off at the equivalent of about €500 per hectare in today's money, and now they get nothing? I'll ask the question of the farming organisations. How much money do you want in the new CAP? Because if we had the same amount of money in Ireland and the rest of Europe as we did in 1991, it wouldn't be 60 billion you'd be fighting for, it would be 150 billion. So I would challenge you not to go along with the idea of consensus, because to me, it doesn't sound like consensus unless you agree that you should have only 40% of what you had in 1991. Well, prove to me that you actually really care about farming and fight for the money, and then you'll get people to stay in farming. And don't ask how do we get people into farming with money in your pockets when the people you're asking to get into farming don't have a penny. It's not that complicated.
Okay, thank you very much. Anja Hazenkap for the Left NV.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter. Ja, zijn in het verleden heel veel
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in the past, many unsustainable decisions were made here in Brussels. Rules were whipped away and measures put on hold, and now the situation in Europe is one that hasn't improved. The huge problem of fertilizers in my country, the Netherlands, is getting worse and worse. And this is also an issue. The same for the livestock industry. Will we finally ensure that we get genuine solutions now? That is something that concerns me, especially when some of the members of the Agriculture Committee speak. They want to whip away all the measures that are on the table. So, colleagues, do you see that something needs to change in farming, that we have to do more with fewer animals, poisonous fertilizers and so on, but better prospects for farmers? And then lastly, on protein, I can only welcome this because for people, livestock, nature and climate change, we need all this. I'm eager to see what we need to have to get young farmers to diversify into different crop types, or to green farming, or to engage in organic farming. I'm very eager to hear from you.
Committee? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The agriculture and food sector are responsible for the jobs of over 17 million people. The progress of these areas is critically important to the goals and objectives of regional development and balanced regional development. So I am pleased that this report and this dialogue has highlighted the importance of food safety and food security and the critical nature of it. However, I also would have liked if Professor Strohschneider had been here to answer the critical questions at the end of his contribution today, because he raised more questions than he provided answers. I would have liked to have asked him if his dialogue or the policies which may emanate from it could have delivered the freedom to farm and for farmers to achieve a fair standard of living. I would have liked to have asked him if the report could have delivered the freedom to feed the European citizen with food produced with the highest level of animal and environmental welfare and not have to compete with third countries with lower standards. I would have liked to have asked him if he could deliver the freedom to farmers being forced to sell their product below the cost of production. We do know that today the farmers are the weakest link in the food chain. They are the price takers, not the price makers. How does he think this report would help in terms of an important recommendation to change that? And crucially, farmers are environmental practitioners on their farms on a daily basis. They're implementing new technology on their farms, which is at a considerable cost to the individual farmers. Does Professor Strohschneider support the recommendations in terms of real and meaningful additional financial supports for these farmers? Can he come forward with extra measures in to help protect the environment alongside farmers and help them address climate change? He speaks a lot today about a new cap, a fit-for-purpose cap. That's what farmers want, and that's what farmers hope will emanate from this agricultural dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ivan David, ESN Agri.
Já jsem přesvědčen o tom, že jsem panelistům naslouchal pozorně. Slyšel.
Thank you. I listened very closely to the members of the panel. I heard about a lot of problems from them. I got an insight into those problems and objectives and their desiderata, but are we thinking why last year farmers took to the streets almost across Europe? The reason was because input prices had shot up. At the same time, they couldn't sell their products at a higher price, so the farmers were getting poorer and poorer. And we should ask whether the EU member states are capable of competing with other countries in agriculture. How are they going to stay afloat without subsidies? The only answer we've heard is raising subsidies. I'm not sure. Are the panel members sure that what they're suggesting will restore farmer satisfaction in the EU?
Sandra Smith, EPP NV.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chair. I'll speak in my native language in Dutch, so you can leave on your headphones. Voorzitter,
Madam Chair, the report makes a plea for measures that will reach deep into the private life of citizens. We've talked about the transition. We've seen that the report has been welcomed by some on the left of Parliament, tax measures and so on.
Doet een appel op.
So I think we need to look at this. The FAO is appealing to the EU member states for sustainable animal protein to be produced. We've seen how meat consumption is increasing, and I think this is all a rather sensitive shift in political terms. Demand is rising. Should we not ensure that there are different forms of innovation, looking at things like environmental pollution and technological neutrality? We could think about ways of reducing methane or getting consumers to change their habits and effectively reducing emissions thereby. And also on fodder, there could be a solution in this respect. I'd like to point out to the left that we in this House can play an important role when it comes to innovation or when it comes to closing the animal waste and feed cycle. Carbon capture and storage is something we could look at with a view to methane. The circular economy is something which can be supported by livestock production. This report shouldn't be taken as a set of rules or a template. The Parliament, rather than this report, should be responsible for the policy going forward.
Replies for 4 minutes each, but first I would like to ask Professor Strohschneider.
No,
okay, he's not connected, so he cannot. I'm sorry, he is not connected. In this case, Peter Miedendorf, please, you have 4 minutes for your reply.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask you, colleague, please, he cannot hear, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the floor again. Those were a lot of questions and remarks, and I will try to give a conclusive answer to a multitude of questions. Firstly, one of the questions was on the crisis management, and I think this report actually quite finely deals with this in the different crises they are calling on for the access of insurance on farm level, because we have a lot of regions and sectors where insuring is simply not possible anymore for individual farmers. Secondly, on crises of supply and demand, calling for a depoliticization of the use of the CMO measures when it comes to crises, and calling for an independent crisis management fund, which is not a belated basic payment scheme, which are recommendations the Commission and the Parliament could work with, in our opinion, right away. Then we had questions on self-sufficiency increase. Well, for us, the core of self-sufficient is producers, young people entering this sector to produce foods. We have written a multitude of position papers about this. This starts with access to land, access to finance, access to knowledge. The report offers a solid foundation for these problems. Then on the diversification of crops, this is of course something very important for soil life and etc. One of the questions from Madame Hazekamp. The problem with the diversification of crops is that not all crops are as profitable as others, leading farmers to choose to grow one crop more than other crops. Increasing the opportunity to sell crops in sustainable value chain agreements, which is offered by this report as well, could be a solution for this. And then I'm also directly answering to the question of how to increase the income. This is done twofolded through one side, these sustainable value chain agreements, allowing more room for these agreements to give farmers more certainty to invest in their value chain. which is done under the CMO 210 article, but also giving them the defense against unfair trading practices with a better enforcement of the unfair trading practices and the establishment of better inter-member state enforcement, to name some examples. I think that was it for the questions that were specifically aimed at my constituency. So I would like to give the floor to the chair back, I think, because I'm not...
And give me your extra minute.
Thank you. Thank you for very much. And the next, Lily Balog, please, if you want to.
Thank you very much. Yes, so first of all, there is enough money, but the public money is not going in the right direction. So we need to redirect and aim it to really the people who are producing food and to really invest in this transition towards agroecology. Second, agroecological approaches are innovation per se, not only technical innovations, but social innovations. Precision agriculture, GMOs, etc., are just a technological fix. They are not going to solve any problems that we are having now, maybe minorities, but they are creating greater dependency for the farming community and decreasing the European resiliency. So it's not a solution. 3, respect for young farmers and the farming community. Why? How can young farmers be attracted much more to farming? It's by creating respect, and you give respect by giving them a fair income, but as well valuing what they are producing. Not only the food products that they can produce for a community and they can get directly feedback, but as well in society, that they are respected and not treated as the last person in the row, but you make them sit on the table and they are part of the communication and decision making. So, and 4, the meat consumption and production. It's let's not just say black and white, because there is a variety of different farming systems, as we could hear as well in the past 2 hours. So indeed, as an agroecological advocate, we are for mixed farming systems, and that's what we are advocating for, because the animals are needed as well in the system. However, science proves and science shows that our meat consumption in Europe is going way beyond the planetary boundaries. We need to decrease our consumption of meat, and we need to consume meat which is better produced in extensive grazing systems or intensive mob grazings, etc. But we need to put back the animal into the landscape, and not like in allotment lots, feeding it with whatever and increasing antimicrobial resistance and creating further problems. We need to increase animal welfare standards and provide healthy meat solutions for the consumers, and therefore we can find a solution to keep the farmers who are producing meat and as well have the animals who are providing many ecosystem services which are important for the resilience of the agroecosystem of Europe. And I believe I was super fast, so I will try to say a few more things. Yes, there was for payment for workers, payment per hectares, to shift away from this. We proposed as Agroecology Europe that we should push much more for a payment per employment and how many workforce is employed, because we need people to work in the agricultural sector. There is a want as well, but we need to value their work as well. So think about that it's not only a payment per hectare, but especially hand labor and fresh vegetables and market gardening needs a lot of hand labor. And we need to respect and give them not the basic income, but a proper income, so you can make it respectful and draw in young people to work in agriculture. And how to increase self-sufficiency. My colleague Peter has mentioned it, that we are producing the products that are adapted to the local conditions are usually not remunerated by the market. Hence, we need to create market conditions where these products can be sold and are sold, which are adapted to the local conditions of the soil, of the climate, of everything else. And how to create markets for these producers. There's plenty of other recommendations in the strategic dialogue, but one is public procurement. It's a huge lever where we can act and we can channel the products. And I'm inside the 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And the next is Leo Alders.
Yes, thank you. First of all, really a warm thank you to the members of Parliament who have talked about depolarization, because in our task force, we have indeed had very different opinions, and still we were able to bring these together, and I think that's also a necessity for the future. If I hear the debate today, I think there is still room for improvement. A point which has totally not been touched today, but which I consider important to bring into this perspective, is energy costs. Whatever we do in the economic union, in the European Union, it starts with energy that we use. And I have to point you at the fact that energy in Europe is 5 times more expensive than in the US. And it's 20 times more expensive than in Russia. And that is for me the secret why, the reason why it's so hard to earn money in agriculture and also in factories like ours. Gas cost is at a completely different level at the different continents. And that's why farmers in other continents can produce much more cheap. And that's why producers like ourselves have a big difficulty to survive in Europe. So instead of thinking that the money is hidden somewhere with somebody, let's be realistic about this. Energy cost is high and contributes to the position we all tend to complain about. What I also want to say is that many of our factories are old and have been built in the 70s and 80s and have never been invested in. So in the last 10 years, due to a lack of competitivity, also in our sector, little money has been earned. So I think we are in front of a fantastic big challenge where a declining European competitivity needs to be married with sustainability. And that's what we really try to say in the task force, that we need to marry a sustainable, competitive, fair agriculture together. And that's a big challenge because for the transition, money will be needed. Absolutely, but there will also be a day that healthy products, green products, need to be paid by the consumers. Because I think you cannot, for the eternity, subsidize this transition. I think by trying to marry these different components, we really thought in the task force about sustainability in function of our children. I heard it many times say we need to do that for children, especially the young mothers made that comment really a lot. I'm fully supporting the diversification point that was brought up, but I think what is core in marrying all these things together is a benchmarking system, and this benchmarking system should measure how sustainable is a certain practice. And if the practice is sustainable, then any farmer who uses these sustainable practices should get incentivized for it. That is for me the key of the report. And how big the amount of money needs to be, actually, we did not discuss that in our task force. We tried to look at the long-term future. Where do we need to arrive in order to have this competitiveness and sustainability in the European environment? And lastly, a word about the debate between organic and inorganic fertilizers, and it has to be reduced and so on. I think that there is a lot of complementarity between organic and inorganic fertilizers, and I fully support that any source available on the farm itself should be used to the optimal point possible. So I hope that this report will further be used as a guideline and that we can evolve into a healthier, fair, social and competitive agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Madame Nelly Haidou, the floor is yours.
Is it okay? I will start with an unusual comment. I will start with generational renewal, because we hear a lot about access to land, access to finance, but I think one component is also very important, needs to be taken into account, and it's education. We really need to bring back the farming profession into the core of society, and we have given in the report a set of tools which can be used and should be used at Commission and Member State level. So I think it's also important that we really look into how we are educating young people, kids, and to put it in Lily's words, actually the entire generations about how farming functions and how to also be excited about this profession. Because often you have education in schools which is saying, oh, you should be a journalist, you should be a lawyer, but nobody says you should be a farmer. So I think we need to change that as well. coming from me is a bit unusual, but I think it's important. Then a few words on the whole topics, reciprocity, agri and trade should talk more. I've been asked a lot why there is a sentence in the trade chapter that we need to raise the importance of agriculture and trade negotiations, because everybody says, oh, we're doing that all the time. We're discussing it up and down. Farmers would not have been on the streets if we would have done it right. Yeah, so there is sectors, they have been played out. There are the feeling of others, they have not heard enough. And we're mentioning China as one of the key challenges right now. So we can really see this is a very strategic sector and it needs a specific attention, which cannot be traded off with other sectors or industries which might be heavier in economic weight. And therefore also the recommendations obviously go beyond what I presented in the 5 minutes. Yeah, we really need to see how we align those who are critical with trade and those who would like to trade in a new approach. And there's a set of recommendations in it, how we should access trade negotiations in future. Yeah, how we are looking at impact assessments, market access, but also how we're using the forests we're having more. So this is really important. I would like to strengthen that here. A word on reciprocity. Reciprocity is a negotiated approach. Equivalence is sort of a comparability approach. I think we need to read also what stands behind other approaches, other ways of looking at agreements. Not everybody likes reciprocity, not everybody likes equivalence. I think we need to become more creative with DG Trade, but also at WT level to look at interoperability and beyond what is possible. We didn't have the time and the dialogue to do so, I have to say, because coming to that conclusion was already very hard and very time consuming. And I think we would have needed another year to put the concepts into that. How we reduce dependency. I think dependency is not per se bad because trading is building on a competitive advantage. So trade is moving goods from areas of surplus to areas of deficits and also from seasons. Yeah? So it is an essential pillar to food systems and it has to be embedded as such. However, and this is really important, is CELCA's members are also trading in the single market. And I think when we look at trade, we always forget about this because this is actually the bigger chunk of trade happening here. So we've given a lot of recommendation on that in terms of and strengthening sustainable input structures. Ukraine accession would be another topic. I'm not going into that. I just wanted to flag, in particular, the ETS carbon topic as one of the examples. One of your colleagues has mentioned that here, where sustainability and trade have to align and where trade has to be a substantial part in the concept of these discussions, as ETS has to work in an international environment. Oh, I need to respond to that. I had to fight, sorry for that, I had to fight that it's not only short supply chains. So I just wanted to defend the entire report is really looking at inclusive. So also local and regional supply chains are very important and they should coexist together. And this is a result from the report. Sorry, that was too important.
Okay, and I would like to ask now Massimiliano Giansante, please.
Volevo ringraziare tutti gli interventi delle gentili e
I'd like to thank all the members for their comments. I have deep respect for what I heard. I believe throughout all the interventions, the centrality of the CAP was remarked upon. Now, it is more than ever a powerful economic instrument, even more than it was before. Farmers play a vital role in Europe and above all in internal stability in the 27 member states. In the Article 39 of the treaty, it says what the CAP is for. It's to guarantee the income and a fair price for farmers, the products that the consumers are using, and we should never forget that. And I'd like to be very clear about that with you all. Farmers now are looking for clarity from this Parliament and from the Commission in political terms. In order to guarantee a future of dignity to our producers, be they small, medium or large, they're all equal from north to south and east to west for me. I make no distinction between dimension nor point of the compass. I think more than ever before the CAP must find its central role again and that applies both to the Commission with its political direction and its budget. It's only 0.4 of the budget that is assigned for agriculture as a percentage of the GDP of the member states. So the 27 member states are spending just 0.4% of their GDP on farming, very little indeed. We must be able to make a success of the challenges of the future. Let's not forget we're competing in a global market internationally now. All sorts of raw materials or processed products from across the world are coming into the EU. These are global markets, and we cannot protect our farmers without building up barriers. That would be very difficult. And what would happen if products were to come in from Ukraine without an appropriate guarantee to European farmers? If Ukraine comes in, it's already 20% alone of the EU farming land, and with the importing of Ukrainian products, there's a big issue there. In terms of the future of the CAP, it has to guarantee a future to farmers. Without the CAP, and I'm looking at Mr. Fidanza in particular, there wouldn't be a future for young farmers, let alone old ones. Our farms need to be able to be competitive, in particular when it comes to standards, and we can do that through the economic policy of the CAP, but also risk management, which is fundamental. In the future CAP, we need to put in risk management. As you've heard in the discussions on the strategic dialogue, environmental funds need to be in a separate and appropriately sized fund. The CAP must become an economic policy for agriculture again. In terms of the impact assessments, it's obvious that there's always the risk of the bill having to be borne by someone from international events, and it's always farmers, and it can't be. In terms of technological progress and the fruits of research and how that benefits farmers, we've got to support farmers technologically in the future. And genetics were brought in 20 years ago, mechanics and chemistry. Now we must support farmers to a more sustainable but more productive model, and one that's more protective of natural resources. I'm not really keen on this debate between crop and animal protein. We're net importers in Europe of crop protein. If we went for crop protein alone, we'd be buying all that in from South America without considering the impact of that import of South American soya. And what about the future of farmers, livestock farmers? They need to have a future too, alongside all other farmers. And I say that to Mr. Nardella as well. We need to take into account the role of farmers in the agri-food table, and we want a proper weight for them in that. Closing with energy costs, we've heard that this is of fundamental importance, keeping energy costs low. We need energy to produce. The less energy costs, the less food costs, and therefore the development of renewable energy, especially given the issues with fossil fuels, we cannot do without them.
It's the eye, but really I have to be very strict for time. Please, you have 1 minute. Renew Kassar. Colleague Kassar from Renew.
Madame la Présidente, je tiens d'abord à saluer le travail qui en
Madam President, let me just try and be all things to all men. But when reading the report, we lack clarity, regrettably, in terms of the fundamental direction for farming in international trade. Firstly, on page 43, the report recognised that income remains low and support for farmers should be more targeted to those who need it most. However, some play down the necessity for the CAP budget, and there's no figure put onto the size it should be. And then sustainability and trade need to be in balance, says the report. But the Commission is still pushing to conclude the Mercosur agreement, even when beef and corn imports don't respect our standards. How do you envisage reconciling both more competitiveness for farmers with a higher price to improve their incomes and compensate a production cost increase because of new environmental requirements? Isn't it time for consistent choices to be made between protecting our model and free trade? Thank you.
And colleague Häusling, Greens.
Ja, erstmal Glückwunsch an Herrn Struß.
I'd like to congratulate Mr. Strossheim bringing 29 different associations for this excellent, I say, opinion. But we have to take into consideration that there are numerous different factors that are not represented. Right now, climate and biodiversity, these are serious issues. Something has to change. Things can't continue on the same flame. We have drought, we have floods. Something has to be done. We need sustainable systems in place, sustainable agriculture, and we need to strengthen the position of the farmer in the chain. We have to have an increase of prices as well. This is very important, and I'd like to ask what Mr. Hansen what is to be presented out of these first 100 days in the strategic dialogue and what Madame von der Leyen has presented overall. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate all those represented here of the sector and those who are representing the sector and for this wonderful debate. And I'd like to emphasize the issue of consensus. Now, I think all of the political groups here could do just as our farmers are doing. How are we going to make reality out of all of this? How is all of this going to actually become reality? Now we have extremism, we have polarization, and I am afraid that this is going to bog down the debate. But with the various proposals that have been made, the main question is how are we going to finance this? And I don't like what's been said, the noises that have been that are out there concerning the funding of the CAP in the future. We have to have some sort of consensus, compromise. We have to understand the necessity to make a sector which is competitive. We have to make that possible for the sector, and that will require financing. So the question is for the future commissioner, changing the view, the issue of the distribution of funds, but how are cohesion funds actually going to be used for this particular purpose? Thank you.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Ik heb twee hele concrete vragen. Eén gaat over de aanbeveling.
Yes, I'd like to make a proposal that we invite farmers to produce in a more effective way, reducing costs. That's interesting, that particular proposal, if you like, or that particular recommendation, because indeed we do need effective agriculture for sustainable agriculture. However, how can the European Union contribute in this direction so that we can have this greater effectiveness, this greater productivity? Second question now. For these new methods, if you like, of governance and the proposals that have been made, the various thoughts that have been expressed, I come to the conclusion that we have to take a step in the direction of if you like, greater control, but not with more regulations. That's not exactly what I mean. Perhaps greater coordination would be a better way to say it. We have to look at, in a critical fashion, the existing legislation and perhaps see what can be done on that front.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The strategic dialogue proposes dramatic root and changes to the European agricultural policy, and among others it proposes that area payments should be discontinued. Now, area payments are currently the most important and the most secure support for European farmers. They are a safety net, and this role has been greatly appreciated over the unfavorable market conditions over the past few years particularly after the influx of cheap Ukrainian import grain. Now, has an impact study been made as to how many farmers and what countries would be hit hard if we abandoned area payments? And how can the new support scheme ensure that farmers will receive the same level of support to begin with? Is this indeed a target, an aim for those making this proposal? Aren't we talking about the EU plagued by budget problems and trying to gain a room for manoeuvring?
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, we're trying to find where we can generate competitiveness in the sector, because the issue of sustainability, we've already established that with the new Green Deal. What we have to take into consideration now are the costs and practices which are sustainable as well. For 25% of the CAP cannot go forward because because there are numerous different difficulties for farmers and impediments as well, and 25% of the CAP is in a kind of frozen status. I'm not speaking about good or bad farmers. All are necessary, all are professionals, and what they're doing right now in the rural areas is in the best possible fashion under the circumstances. So sustainability, yes, but added value with the taking into consideration the circular economy in Europe. And the producing countries right now in Europe are having numerous problems. We have to respect our farmers. We have to respect our consumers as well with this particular clause that's been put. Also the phytosanitary aspect as well. 10 years before issuing some sort of alternative, I'm afraid that's a bit too long. Thank you.
I'll read the name right. Tom Diepeven. I'm sorry for my...
Dank u wel, voorzitter. U bent geslaagd. Dank u. Het volgende dat ik nog...
Thank you very much. Now, the strategic dialogue has shown us. It's shown us that we need individual responses in order to achieve sustainability. Sustainability not only for the environment, but for the economy as well, for the sector overall. So it's very important to have some sort of viable form there, sustainable form. But that can't be at the expense of the survival of farmers, in other words. This is something that has to be understood in Europe. Indeed, it's a pity that Professor Strohsnyder isn't here. Perhaps you could respond to some of these questions and queries as to how we can improve the situation, taking into consideration, however, individual situations and, of course, the idiosyncrasies in each country. For example, the situation in Holland. How do you feel that benchmarks can function in an effective fashion within the European Union?
Singer.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende. Ich höre
Thank you very much. I've been listening very carefully to the dialogue that's been taking place here, and I'm looking at the young farmers here, and I'm wondering what they're thinking under these particular circumstances. We would all more like greater social and environmental sustainability. And, of course, we want to be able to provide food for our European citizens, and we can only do that with the help of our farmers. And that's why I hope that from our dialogue we will convey a sense of trust to our farmers, and that the policy that will be adopted, which will be one which farmers will adopt and embrace with happiness and joy. I think, for example, for the entire range, be that in small livestock raisers or farmers, so I do feel that the dialogue is something extremely important. A pity, indeed, that the professor is not here to respond to the various questions, but we need our farmers. We have to entrust in them. We have to instill that sense of trust in them as well, and we want them to feel the same way and satisfied with what they're doing. Thank you.
Buddha.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm very bothered but that the speaker has gone and hasn't done a assessment of the rural areas. We should take it the other way round. We should look at the needs of rural areas and then design European development policy. We've got farmers on the streets. We don't have the legislation to help them deal with the reality they're facing. What is the main role of the CAP, in your opinion? Is it for food producers, or is it to make us a bigger global player? What about the people working in it and the high burden they face? Is it about the environment, or is it about social protection? What do we do with CAP money? Are we just paying it to small or medium-sized farmers? And how do we decide what are small and medium-sized farmers per country? We need to take into account what's going on in every country when we decide who is small or medium-sized. It's all the sectors we need to consider.
Vice Chair Sergio Como, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. D'abord, je voudrais dire et remercier.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Professor Strohsteider and all of the panelists for everything that they've done, because I think the work has been excellent. They've managed to get past all of the taboos and to deal with all of the challenges to reach a consensus. Now, farming is a key issue for our society. I think that is an important part of the consensus, and sometimes that seems to be called into question. The second important thing is that we must turn the page after 30 years of agricultural action. Now, in terms of direct support, it's not about jeopardising the future of farmers, it's about being efficient with the money. Very often, producers are the weak link in our society. Time has changed, and like the Professor said, I think it is time now for us to do the work. The Council, the Commission, and of course the Parliament must work with all of the committees, Regi, Budge, etc. now, and of course Envy, but also especially Agri.
2 minutes for our stakeholders, so please Massimo Giansante from COPA, please 2 minutes.
Sì, grazie.
Thank you very much. Very, very briefly indeed, I do feel that the future of the CAP has to be oriented in the direction of all farmers. Of course, a very important role, of course, is played by this particular single European agricultural policy. We can't even perceive or conceive of agriculture without this particular system in place and the support that it provides. The necessary incentives, not necessarily speaking about subsidies, but incentives for small farmers and for those that suffer the most. For example, in alpine regions. Furthermore, the CAP ought to be there for professional farmers as well. Extremely important and absolutely fundamental, I think. As concerns in general climate change, part of the strategic dialogue, of course, is focused on providing for competitiveness and productivity under these particular circumstances. 25% of the CAP is there for eco schemes that indicate some of the limits that exist, and that was mentioned by the Spanish member of parliament as well. There is huge speculation that's taking place on the part of international agricultural markets. Of course, this constitutes a serious problem for farmers because in the end they have to deal with a greater burden, bureaucracy and red tape and so on and so forth. Now, we have to bolster the income generated by farmers as well. And I simply want to remind you that 2 years ago we had this particular debate. It was a very, very intense political debate indeed. The product prices and profits of farmers and the consequences that it had overall for consumers and for farmers as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Firstly, I would like to highlight also the disappointment from our side that our chair is not here. But I would like to highlight as well that the recommendations are written by the stakeholders themselves, thus not by the professor and therefore not delegitimized by his absence. Firstly, on the comments on the CAP budget, this report speaks of a dedicated and sufficient budget for the common agricultural policy. And this recommendation fuels into the next discussion of the MFF already, where the independence of such a budget is under threat, by essence threatening the commonality, the C of the CAP, and all its what it's going to do for the livelihood of farmers and the ability for environmental remuneration. Secondly, on the competitiveness question, we see it as twofold. Firstly, access to innovation, thus both the infrastructure but also the legal frameworks around innovation, referring to the recommendation on seeds and breeding techniques. And secondly, the financial instruments and access to finance. Then thirdly, on the tailored approach, which is in essence a way to reduce administrative burden for farmers who have met goals of European legislation, that they don't have to adhere to generic measures as well anymore, making farmers goal owners rather than simply following generic measures made up after at the desk. And then fourthly, the comment on the benchmark, which has come back a lot of times. It is going to be challenging. I'm the last one to not acknowledge that. But currently, we are already seeing a lot of visions of sustainability by banks put on farmers, by processes put on farmers, individually made by these companies or other value chain actors. There is a need to structure this. The benchmark is an opportunity to do so, and I invite everyone, all the MEPs, to have a meeting on how to execute this in a structured way. And then lastly, I would like to thank the presidency of this council for inviting all of the stakeholders here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the floor is now Lily Balogh. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I would just like to point out that food production is much more than just producing food. It's about maintaining diverse and vibrant landscapes and landscape features, but as well about cultural heritage and traditions, and as well about creating jobs and rural livelihoods which are vibrant. That was mentioned several times by you. There was a question or comment about protein production. Indeed, in my presentation as well, I said diverse crop rotation. We need to produce much more proteins here in Europe as fodder, as feed, but as well as food here in Europe, and not imported from Brazil, where they are cutting out trees and causing deforestation. About the increasing energy prices and input prices, as you might have heard as well about my presentation, agroecology promotes closed circular systems where they are producing their own energy and their own inputs. Therefore, they are not subject to the fluency of the prices. And as well, I would like to raise the awareness about carbon markets, how it is a fake solution. It's a reductionist system. It's not taking into account the biodiversity, the water scarcity, the pollution, and many other problems. Let's not look into a fake solution, but approach holistically. Otherwise, we're just going to create more problems. And about the payment per hectare, there have been several assessments made. I invite as well the European Commission and the Parliament to make them as well. But you can find by researchers and civil society, the Transnational Institute, for instance, the report where I took the data out, you can take a look at it and see that 80% of the subsidies are going into the hands of 20% of the farmers. So this is not a way of maintaining the production in the European system, but a way of maintaining power in the undemocratic power in Central Eastern Europe that you are aware of as well. So yes, and I have 6 seconds, so thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Leo Alders.
Yes, I propose to switch with my colleague and then I will take the word.
Yeah, apologies. I'm one of the young mothers who has to pick up her kid very urgently. It's only 6 and will not find his way home. Okay. So I will have to run after this statement. Just one word on sustainability and trade and the Mercosur agreement. I think we should not lead ourselves into a heated debate at this stage. The recommendations say we need to look into new ways for the future. It didn't say let's revise all the agreements under negotiations. This is very important. It also says we also need to look into diversification and we need to look at the strategic asset of agriculture in this context. So we should also acknowledge, next to all the opposition, and I have to hear a bit more positively than you, there are also a lot of actors who would be very much in favor to have this agreement and for whom it would be very beneficial to have this agreement concluded in the agriculture sector. So there is no black and white on that topic. And I would like to avoid that we have this impression that now everybody's against Mercosur because we have now a review of how we're conducting trade policy. Because also the Mercosur side has committed to the Paris Agreement, has a set of regulation in place, and it's now our job to monitor how they are implementing it. Yeah? And on top of that, we have created already unilateral safeguards such as deforestation and others, which are coming on top of this discussion. So I think we should have a very balanced look at this because there are also very much people interested in having this concluded. With that, I'm very sorry, I have to leave. My sincere apologies.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so now,
okay. I'm also hopeful towards the future because in our sector green technologies are being developed and within 2 years from now we will be on stream with green products and it's a fantastic technological challenge, but still this heads in the right direction. Although I have to give one voice of criticism. The whole green journey was promised to be supported by a number of help, aids, subventions, but until now this does not work in reality. But I don't want to nag about that right now too much. What I wanted to add to the debate is also I have had a very interesting debate in France about what would be the impact of war in Europe. And this is maybe a bit a frightening subject, but we also, I think, need to look at our vulnerability of our systems in Europe. With regards to the question of one member of parliament on how do you increase efficiency and how do you steer on targets, I think they are very much linked to each other, and I think that Sjouke will probably say a few words about that later on. I think about the report, I would like to say what you see is what you get. The report is there. There is no further elaboration on components of the report. I mean, the CAP budget, how that will be distributed in the future. Well, we have given direction to that, but we have not worked out any budget proposals. That would have been impossible in the time frame. If you see what kind of long-term direction we give, however, then it's possible to design a benchmarking system that steers towards these future goals. And I would urge to start up that discussion on benchmarking urgently, because I also understand that you need to do it country by country, for example, but you need to know where am I steering towards. And if you know where you're steering towards, then you can set targets. And in my experience, when you start measuring things, these things start to get alive. So this benchmark detailed discussion, I think that's one of the crucial things to tackle, because that's linked to the money, and that's crucial in this whole debate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, all the panelists. And now I would like to ask for statement DG Agri. Please, you have 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, for organizing this event, and many thanks to all of you for a very rich and in-depth discussion. And I would also like to thank the panelists. I think Peter has just referred to the fact that these recommendations have been co-written by all of the members of the Strategic Board, and I think the knowledge they have shown here today proves that they were able to make these recommendations. Maybe just 1 point on procedure and process and 1 point on content. On process, you have seen that the mission statement of Commissioner-designate Hansen foresees that the Commission will come forward with a vision for the future of agriculture and food within 3 months after the entry into the job. And the mission statement says that this vision will be building on the recommendations of the strategic dialogue, of your recommendations, as it will build evidently on your input, on your advice, and the advice on many other reports and evidence which we will gather by then. On content, I think you will understand that it's for the new college to present and decide the exact content of this vision based on your recommendations. But one thing is clear, if I've listened to today's discussion, the topics that you have raised are all pertinent. The question is, how do we organize a fair standard of living? How do we ensure sustainability within the planetary boundaries? These 2 questions are in the center of all the discussions which we have heard here today, but related to this, evidently, are many other issues that you have raised. Simplification, reciprocity in trade agreements, risk management tools. So all these questions and your recommendations will be the basis of our further considerations. Many thanks.
Director General Butcher, thank you very much for your statement. And now I think that we can start with the second panel, Resilient and Innovation-Driven EU Food System, how to incentivize the transition. So I would like to ask now our panelists for the floor, and each for 5 minutes, please. First will be Lennart Nilsson, the President COGECA.
Thank you very much, dear Chair, dear honourable members of the Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lennart Nilsson. I'm a mixed farmer on the Swedish west coast. We run a family farm with crops, beef, cattle, and like most farms in Sweden, we also have some forestry. I'm a member of the board for Swedish Federation of Farmers and Cooperatives, and I have over 25 years of experience working with agri-cooperatives. And since